Okay, why don't we get started? So we also have 15 people joining by Zoom. So first, my name is London. I am a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Michigan. I'm also a faculty associate for the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies. I first want to thank you all for taking the time to attend the talk on the election day. And this is also the 7th presentation for the China Center's lecture series, and the complete schedule of the Loon lecture series, I think, is available here today and also on the China Center's website. And I believe Ina sends out email reminder every week. I also want to start with a few announcements, some housekeeping issues. So on the coming Friday, November 8th, the Ross School of Business, the Michigan Law School, and the China Center will present Professor Ji Li from the University of California, Irvine Law School, and who will be speaking on negotiating legality Chinese companies in the U.S. legal system. And his talk will take place in Ross School of Business at Loon. Flyers are available here today. And I also want to mention about the next talk in the China Center, the next lecture. So the next presentation in the lecture series will take place on Tuesday, November 12th, and will be given by Professor William Lively, Professor of International Studies and Sociology at the University of Washington. And he will speak on explaining the sexual empowerment of married women in China. And I should note that his talk will not take place here. It will take place in room 455, Weiser Hall. So just to be clear. So, okay. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Professor Siqi Zheng. Professor Zheng is a STL Champion Professor of Urban and Real Estate Sustainability in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. In 2019, Professor Zheng established MIT's Sustainable Urbanization Lab and is the director of her lab. She is also the faculty director of the MIT Center for Real Estate and the faculty chair of the MIT Asia Real Estate Initiatives. Professor Zheng was also the former president of the Asian Real Estate Society from 2018 to 2019, but she is currently the second vice president of American Real Estate and Urban Economics Association. Professor Zheng is an internationally renowned expert on urban and environmental economics and policies. She is a prolific scholar and has published extensively in top journals, including the Proceedings of National Academy of Science, Nature, Human Behavior, and Journal of Economic Literature, Journal of Economic Perspectives, and so on. She's also the co-author of the book, Blue Skies Over Beijing, Economic Growth and Environment in China, published by Princeton University in 2016. As someone who have known Professor Zheng for a very long time, I always wonder why she's so productive. So I'm very glad that she's here with us today to speak on her most recent work, Tariff War Jumping at the China-Vietnam Border, which as you know is an important geopolitical topic. So please join me in welcoming Professor Siqi Zheng.
Yes, can you hear me from this mic? Yes, thank you. I'm not going to stand here. I will just be here. Thank you again for inviting me for the China seminar here. The University of Michigan China Center is a role model. And I hope that MIT also had such a China Center. We do have China classes. I co-teach with other professors at MIT, the Sloan School of Management, Huang Yazheng, for China course. And we also have some other China classes, but we don't have such a center as a hub to gather all the community here. So I really feel like this is a very good place. And I also saw it's not just the China Center, but also international studies. And then we have the Southeast Asia, which is very related to my topic today, and also other region centers. So, so today I'm going to talk about my working paper together with Professor Matthew Kahn from USC and Professor Wenqi Liao from NUS. So basically still a working paper, and I got so interested in this topic because as Lan just mentioned, I moved to MIT like 7 years ago, but before that, I was a professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing. So most of my research was about China and China's urban development, China's real estate, and China's sustainability. And now I understood more and more that we need to like to take a more like a regional perspective, especially after all this global dynamics and the geopolitical tension, and also the real China and the US trade war, then how this supply chain dynamics relocate from China maybe to Southeast Asian countries or even to Mexico, to Brazil, and how those dynamics have the consequences on cities and the environment. So that's why I got interested in this research. So basically, this is our first project. We are very ambitious. We have a framework, umbrella, to start this, not just for this Vietnam, but also for other countries. But this is the first one, we look at Vietnam. Now we just got started for our second project. We're gonna look at all these other, all the countries in Southeast Asia. So basically today I will talk about this first project, and I look forward to your comments. Actually, when we started this project, I had never been to Vietnam. And then I just used some data from their yearbooks and some satellite data and all this data, second-hand data, to understand this, to study this. And then I thought, oh, I should just do this in this remote way. Then in the past summer, I just went there for my first time. I went to Hanoi in the north, the capital city, and I understood much better from what the stories on the ground. So now we're gonna do more. So that's basically how I started this research. So as of you very familiar with the geography in the Southeast Asia, we have China, and then Vietnam is a very thin S-shaped country, but they have a big population. And so basically, there's a border between China and the US, which we will, between China and Vietnam, which we will look at today. So basically, this is the structure of my talk. I will first talk about why we started this, the motivation, and then background data, and then some technical things. I will be at the high level of these technical things, the regressions, and some robustness checks, but I want to tell mainly the story, what we are looking at, and then conclusion. So basically, since my kind of expertise is urban and environmental, so that's why you see the keywords, the urban, which means cities, the urban environmental consequences of this Vietnam-China border thing. It's not like everything. So the motivation, so today is a very busy day about election day, right? So that's very relevant to this study also. And back to 2018, at that time, the Trump administration, they initiated the US-China trade war. And at first, people might think this is a temporary thing, like 1 year, 2 years, a few years. But later they found out, actually this, here in the US, it's a bipartisan kind of a consensus to really face the challenge from all aspects from China, and then the trade war maybe is medium term at least. It's not like temporary, but till now still, the trade war and even in the near future also, in the medium term. So, and then this, because China, US, the largest one or two countries in the entire world, and this trade war really have massive impacts on China side, on the US side, and also for other countries, right? So there are many, many studies. If you use Google Scholar, you say China-US trade war, and you see hundreds of papers. And for those papers, we look into the literature, and these papers, existing studies, they mainly focus on macroeconomics, the trade literature especially, and also they look at the industrial organization, what kind of goods, what kind of products, and the supply chain are affected. But it's basically they always take countries as a unit of analysis, like China or the US or another third country. That they use the country as a unit of analysis because it's so global issue, such a global issue. And then many papers, they look at, okay, on the US side, really lowered the import from China. That's very intuitive. And then also cost loss, welfare loss to the consumers because products became more expensive, right? because the tariff. And the US consumers also suffered from this. And also the trade war also helped the Republicans gain some popularity in the United States, although it's basically some welfare loss to the real people. And relocated a global value chain, and some other countries, bystander countries, benefited. And they look at different countries. And on the China side, they also show the China's exports also shrank, of course, to the US. So that's basically what we look at the literature. Let me see. Okay, good. Oh, and now we just identified a research gap. The research gap is all the other papers, they're trade papers. They look at countries. But we want to look within a country, within like spatial dynamics. Within a country, it's not like a homogeneous, all the effects are the same, right? So we want to look at within a country, maybe some cities, they suffered more, some cities, they suffered less, I mean, for the US and the China side. And also for another third country, maybe also some like heterogeneity among all the cities. So we did our first paper, actually, already got published in a real estate journal. Last year we did this. And we look into Chinese cities on the other, like China. So we use this US-China trade war, the tariffs put on these products. But Chinese cities, they are also different, right? For those cities, they are mainly export-oriented. They mainly produce, manufacturers, they produce goods that they rely on these exports to the US for the main economic engine. They've suffered a lot from the trade war. And for those cities, they suffer more. We did see the housing price also a larger decline. But of course, the mechanism will be first, some firms, they left the city or they shut down. So the cities lost some jobs in that manufacturing industries that put that's exposed to higher tariff increase. And then because people lost their jobs and they lost the income, so they couldn't buy. And the demand for housing also declined. And then the cities, they also suffered, the city government, because Chinese cities rely on the land sale revenue as a major source of the physical revenue. And for the cities, that they couldn't, the real estate market got hit by this trade war, and also the city government lost the physical revenue, land sale revenue. So that's our first paper. Now we're going to look at the third country, which is Vietnam. And then we look into this urban and environmental side of the trade war on Vietnam. And so this we really highlight the spatial thing, and the heterogeneity among different cities and why. And then we not only look at the growth part. Of course, Vietnam takes advantage of that for sure. And the many supply chain manufacturers, they moved from China to Vietnam. The cities got more jobs and economic growth. But we also look at the environmental side, because we are very curious whether Vietnam will repeat China's story like 20, 30 years ago, when at that time China boomed. China joined WTO, a lot of trade, and all the Chinese cities, they build the industrial parks, get manufacturers in, and then started also pollution. Because you produce all the things, then you pollute it, and especially in 15 years ago, when I was in Beijing, so polluted. That was one of my reasons I wrote my book, Blue Sky Over Beijing, but it's not blue sky, so I decided to move to Boston to get the blue sky here. So that's why we say, okay, growth is good, but let's also look at the environmental side, whether Vietnam will repeat China's old story of the pollution. So that's basically why we started our research. How we started our research. It seems that it's some lag here. Okay. The background, of course, is the trade war, right? The trade war started from 18, but it kind of phased in, step by step, put on more and more tariffs on a wide range of the products. So it's S301 China tariffs. And basically, since all the countries, for all the countries in WTO, on average, the tariff only 2%, right? For all the countries in WTO, when they trade with each other, 2%. But for those goods, like more than 6,800 goods and later more, then they just sharply increase the tariff on top of this 2%, like 25% or later 10%, whatever. So it's a huge increase, right? So because of this, imposed the tariffs on the goods, and then you can see these origin countries' share of the US total imports. Then you can clearly see, after this, China had a decline. At first, very high, like grew very fast from 2000, the WTO time, and then after trade war declined, and then for other Southeast Asian countries, they increased. This is on average, but Vietnam really stood out compared to others. So that's a fact. That's a pattern. And then we want you to understand the reason and also the consequences. So then we went to Vietnam. I mentioned last summer, this past summer, we went to Vietnam. We understood intuitively, not like very rigorous in terms of this data to show, but we interviewed some manufacturings, like Foxconn, another like similar to Foxconn but smaller, called Wistron. So basically, they produce the electronics, laptops, computers, TVs, like that. They moved some of their plants from China to Vietnam. And they told us, especially Wistron, I wrote a case study of that. And at first, they tried other countries, like India and Indonesia. But they later found Vietnam really, in terms of the culture even, of course, geographic distance, but also culture-wise, and very close to China. And later I will show you that it's very convenient to, like, by roads, like highways, from Guangdong province, which is the center of economic growth in China side, to drive to Vietnam for the trucks to move these intermediate goods. So that's basically what we heard. And also, Vietnam has much cheaper labor cost, much cheaper like other land and cost. And Vietnamese people, the workers, they work very hard. Now they still work 6 days a week. Only one day, Sunday is a weekend. And we also, when we went there, and I really felt the air quality is good. It's not like as we anticipated that maybe a lot of pollution. But when we were in Hanoi, we did see some like blue sky and for those days. And then, but maybe that's because we were lucky, but we went back to look into the energy and environment data. And we found out that basically Vietnam's renewable energy a much larger share compared to that in China. So this is some data to show you that, especially from 2018, I'm not sure whether it's a coincidence, but from 2018 you can see that they just a sharp increase of the wind, solar, and the biomass, all those renewables. But at first, they also have very good hydronic, like hydropower, because they have many rivers, like their geography. And China side is still coal. Of course, they also have some like renewable energy in recent years, especially after 2008. But you can see the coal is still above 50%. And China side, the problem is the coal is very dirty. Not just coal, but also dirty coal. And then Vietnam also has a very ambitious plan to further improve the clean energy share. Now it's already more than half clean energy share, 51%. And then they have a future plan to change for the transition to even 72%. So that's a big picture. So it gives us a early signal or optimistic sign that for the manufacturers, when they move from China to Vietnam, of course, when they moved, not because of the environmental issues. These are all externalities because of tariff, because of high labor cost. Maybe also because of the rising environmental regulation on the China side. But there's some kind of unintended, perhaps, or it's some side effect, which is maybe positive when they produce the same things, like computer in China or shoes in China, produce the same unit of product. And here, maybe less energy intense than that when they produce in China. So that's basically that. Okay, that's basically our speculation. Speculation, then we look into the data. So here is the Vietnam natural and economic geography, some background. It's a lower middle income country, but it's more than 100 million people, and it's mountainous and a lot of rivers. It's a very long and thin. And basically 2 economic core centers. The south side here is the Ho Chi Minh City, and the north part is the Hanoi, which is their capital. So when we were there, they told us that it's very similar to China's Shanghai and Beijing. So the Ho Chi Minh City, north the capital, in the south, like Shanghai, like the business center and financial and all this business, a lot of market economy recent years. And now the Hanoi is like Beijing, political center. So that's why always in the past, the south are more prosperous than the north. The north basically quite political, and educational, and all those public government functions. Here, more richer and also more business. And it's a distance, long distance, 2,000 kilometers. And they mainly rely on roadways, 80%, especially for freight transport, 80% on roadways. That's why we use the roadway to measure distance. And waterways, small part, and the railway even very tiny. I don't understand why they didn't build high-speed rail, because on the China side, they built a lot of high-speed rail, right? And then now, maybe they were thinking and they are planning, but till now, no high-speed rail, and the traditional railway very slow. So that's basically trucks on the roads. So that's a way. And one thing is only 6-hour drive from Guangdong. And Guangdong, basically a quarter of the export in Guangdong. And then they just 6 hours, they jump the border. That's why we call our paper title is jumping the border, the Vietnam-China border. When you jump across the border, then you immediately from 27% of tariff to 2%. So of course, the manufacturing, they understand that. So that's the geography. Let me see. And then because the north part is closer to the border as geography, and then now it's very clear tariff war there, and the manufacturers, they want to jump. So then we look into, and then traditionally the south part was more prosperous, right? But since the north part is closer to China, and then our hypothesis is the north part will gain more than the south part because of the distance, right? So that's why we just look into the pattern. It seems true that, so basically, if you see the change from 2015 to 2021, the growth, the north part gains more, but just this is raw data, and later we will give you some more rigorous patterns when we run regressions. And then we look into, at first we could only look into the yearbooks. We look into the yearbooks, we understood that they have 63 province level locales. But those provinces are so small, it's very small, and it's very similar to the US counties or the China side, the prefecture cities. So, and then because the data level, they are on the provincial level. So that's why we use these 58 provinces, the small ones, plus 5 major cities like Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi and Haiphong those 5 major cities. They become our unit of analysis. And then we also collect all the data like tariffs, and tariff is very detailed. Thanks to the trade papers, we directly just grab the data from, they publish their data, they contribute the data. They just put the data online, so we get all this very detailed tariff data from other papers. And then we match, because the tariffs are on products, and then we match with the industries, because we need, for those cities, we need to understand their composition of the industries. So we match the products with the industries. And then we got very good firm data, which is called OBIS. That's a data set, global data set. And from that, we can get all the firms data. Then we aggregate the firm level output to this city level or province level. From now on, I'm going to use the same term, city, as this is 63 units, 63 cities. Actually, some are major cities, some are small provinces. And other data, FDI and all the things, and the travel distance, we use the roadway distance, not like straight line distance. It's a roadway by driving the distance to the border, to the 3 major borders on the China-Vietnam border and other borders of their territory to Laos and then Cambodia as placebo test. And then the other things like air pollution, particulate matter, PM 2.5, PM 10, and wind and energy and all the things. So that's the statistics. Okay, then the key thing is to measure the tariff. So on the China side is bad thing. We call it tariff shock or trade war shock, negative shock. On the Vietnam side, it's a good thing. So we call it privilege. It's the opposite side. The flip side is a privilege, right? So the idea is for those products or for those industries, if the United States impose a higher tariff on those industries in China, and then those industries in Vietnam will be better off, right? Because the Vietnam side only very low tariff, but for that industry in China side it's very high. So there will be a tendency for the firms, for those industries that face very high tariff in China side to jump the tariff war to the Vietnam side. So on the Vietnam side, we call it privilege. So then we just construct such a measure. It's called Baltic ship shear. So basically, that's a commonly used way to measure this, to make this exogenous shock. How to make an exogenous shock? Intuitively, we don't need to dive into the formula, but intuitively, this is saying, we look at city G in Vietnam. This is the Vietnam side. City G's initial year, like 2015, which is the initial year. City G's initial year, what kind of industries in City G, right? The initial year compositions, maybe like some IT 20%, shoes 30%, some other service 20%, something like that. Initial year before the tariff was an issue, even before our study period, 2015. At that time, your city's industrial composition, what kind of industries in your city? And then at that time, people didn't know that that would be a tariff war, trade war moving forward. And then we look at this S301 tariff on that industry after the China-US trade war took place. And then we just kind of weighted average. The weighted average means, for example, for a city, fortunately, the city has some industries that later the China side got the tariff problem. But the city has this kind of endowment from the very beginning. The cities, they have those industries. And then after trade war, those cities will benefit more, right? For other cities, for example, for some other cities, at first, initially, they don't have those industries, or they have very small share of those industries. Then after trade war, they couldn't benefit that much. So basically, the initial condition of your city's industrial composition will later determine to what extent you can benefit from the China-US trade war as the tariff privilege. So that's basically the idea. The idea why we call it exogenous, this is because when US imposed this, they didn't consider the Vietnam side, right? They only consider China side, right? When they determine which products they impose tariff, they won't consider the Vietnam, the spatial thing. That's totally out of their consideration. But that's why this is exogenous. We did a test. So tariff exogeneity. So basically, distance to China border, all those cities, you can see it's almost like scattered around, right? It's not like some place really benefit much more systematically, but because initial industrial composition has nothing to do with US-China trade war, later the tariffs. And we also checked the COVID, because this time period really coincide with the COVID problem. But we found that COVID also orthogonal to this tariff shock to those cities. But we did carefully use some like Collins standard errors to control for that, the spatial and temporal correlations in the residues. And then now we are ready to do some analysis after measure the tariff, city-specific tariff privilege. It's very straightforward. So basically, we just run regression with the outcome variable as an economic outcome or the later environmental outcome. The output, city FDI, city population, city employment, or etc. And then on the right-hand side, we control for city fixed effect and year fixed effect, and some city initial conditions, time trend. More importantly, the focus here is a tariff privilege measure of city J of year by year. It's different because it's over years, the tariff changed. And then we look at beta 1. And our hypothesis is if you have higher tariff privilege, of course, you will benefit more. Maybe you will grow faster, your city. And then we also interact this tariff, which is important, this tariff measure with the distance to China. That's a border effect. When if two cities have the same tariff privilege, but one is closer to the border, the other is totally far away, then the one closer to the border will benefit more because it's easier for the manufacturers from China side jump the wall to relocate to the cities closer to the border. So that's we want to observe a gradient, the spatial gradient. And then we also say, okay, whether your city is ready. Maybe your city at first had very bad infrastructure and no like fundamentals, even you are very close, like a village, very close to a border, and they're not ready to receive those relocations. Right? And then we use some pre-existing like FDI to measure whether the city at first was already, at least you had some like environmental, business environment, and you had some forms there. You are not like a small village, then you can receive more. So that's basically what we want to test. All right, so then we run regressions with all the specifications to test, as you can see, to test all kinds of specification with all these very strict fixed effects to control for all unobservables, and the correlations, the auto serial correlations. And then we did find our China border effect. Look at it. So basically, first, we find basically if your city really has a privilege in terms of tariffs, then you really have higher output growth after the trade war. So that's very clear. This mean effect is very clear. And then we interact with the distance to China measured by 100 kilometers, like 100, 200, like that. And then we see a negative sign very clearly, a negative gradient. So basically, the gain of the 1 percentage point increase the tariff privilege will lead to, on average, 3.9% actual output near China borders. And this will drop by 0.2% for every 100 kilometers, so which is this. Remember, the Vietnam is such a thin S shape, and the north-south distance about 2,000 kilometers. So then you can roughly see at the very close to the China border, the north, 3.9% effect, right? And then you decay, and then if you go to the very south, which is 2,000 kilometers, then it's almost zero. So that's basically, you can think about this. And then pre-existing FDI matters. If you have a high FDI before all this trade war thing, then you gain more. And roadway infrastructure. So basically, infrastructure and the pre-existing some investment are important. You need to be ready at least to absorb those relocations. And then we test also export sector versus local sector, right? So we look at the export sector really grow much faster because that's about the trade. It's not like a restaurant. Restaurant will also have some spillovers. Later I will show. If you have better jobs, then people are richer, then they spend more money to go shopping and then go to restaurant, but that's a spillover. But the main thing is still the output, the export sector, that they produce things, then they trade with the United States. Then we say, okay, maybe it's a general border effect. All the places close to any border will benefit from trade or something. But no, we try to also test it's a placebo. Say, it's no such a border effect near the borders of Vietnam and Laos or the Vietnam and Cambodia, because they are both countries outside of China. But only the borders to China that manufacturing jumped the wall. So that's to show that this is really a China thing, China border thing. And not just the output, but also the FDI, the foreign direct investment, not just the how many forms of how much of the US dollars of those FDI as a capital flow, but larger companies, that's a multinational, because we saw this FDI project size, larger companies, mainly these multinational companies, they are moving. Then we look at the employment, population, and the migration, and we did also say the same thing. Basically, the firms first come, then hire more workers, and then more population move in, and they do have a slightly some spillovers to the retail sector. But the first order thing is still the employment. And because of that, north-south reversal, as I just mentioned, the Ho Chi Minh City in the south was a traditional center, very like the #1 growth center, like Shanghai. But unfortunately, it's too far from the border. And now, it's still a big center. It's still like 2 centers. But there's some evidence that is a reversal, that the north is growing faster, catching up to the north part, especially Hanoi, that center, is catching up. So basically, this is the coefficient of the distance to the center, the distance to China. So if it's negative, means the north will be higher, right? It's a negative slope. And at first you saw, before trade war, it's positive sometimes because the south is higher. And now it's like this. The north is getting better, catching up. And then, okay, that's about growth. Growth is good. But if you only have growth, you have all the manufacturing come here and then pollute. And then we are not very sure of the welfare effect of this, right? So then we look into the environmental side. On the other hand, we look at the environmental side. So for the environmental side, we did the following things. So first, this is an exercise. We always try to estimate a so-called environmental coolness curve, which is an inverse U-shape. It's an inverse U-shape that always we estimate for countries and also for regions, cities in a country. The idea is x-axis is the income or GDP per capita. Y-axis is the pollution level. So in general, always many countries in the past, the history show that clear evidence that when the countries or the regions, when they were poor, then when they grow, they first pollute. The pollution level will increase because you always first need to do some dirty manufacturings. And at that time also, people there, they care more about making money instead of clean air because they first need to survive. They need to first make money. So they always first increase, the pollution level increase with respect to income increase. And then as a turning point, you will see some decrease, a sign. Why? Because those countries that are at the middle income, they now upgrade to the service industries more. And also people there, they are now more educated, they have income, now they care more about the environmental side and their quality of life, so they push government to regulate these polluting industries. So that's a general pattern. Then we tested this for many countries, and for Chinese cities, they all had this pattern. The thing is, the turning point is not static, not a physical law or something. And if, for example, you have better technology, greener technology, or you have better like energy source, for example, the turning point will shift left side to leftwards, which means you don't need to wait until that high level of income that you have a turning point. Instead, at the earlier income level, you will see the turning point, which is optimistic, and then you will see the pollution level start to going down. So that's why we estimate this, and we did say that at first, so first for the Vietnamese side, the 63 cities or provinces, they have an inverse U-shape EKC. And then at first they increase and then they decrease. And then, however, after this FDI flow in, the turning point started slightly move to the left side with the early stage. And the turning point was about this much, $2,000, shifted left side. So here give you a better sense of this. So we estimate like PM 2.5, PM 10, right? So then annual income per capita, and then when you first, from very poor to relatively not that poor, you see the pollution going up, and then at turning point, you see this going down, right? So that's basically the general pattern, but you will see that for those cities, they have bigger FDI and greener technology, they will first go down, so which means the pollution level, absolute level goes down, and then it's a little bit going to the left, maybe not that very significant, but from the model, we saw some like shift to the left. Okay, and then we say, why? Then we want to understand the pollution production function. This is kind of pollution production function, log pollution level as a function of the output, right? Of course, if your city have higher output, you have higher potential to be more polluted because you emit. But then we have an interaction term say, okay, at the same output, of course, higher output, higher pollution, but at the same output, if your city is so lucky have the endowment of more cleaner energy, and that can mitigate this effect. The same unit increase of the output, if you have cleaner energy instead of dirty coal, so your pollution level will not increase that much. So that's an intuition. And then we try to understand whether that's true, so that's why we have this interaction. CES is the clean energy share, basically the clean energy share in that province. And we did say that, of course, when you have higher output, you have higher pollution. But if you have a higher clean energy share, CES, then you see the opposite effect. So which means you will pollute less. So that it will test for the particulate matter, the ambient pollution level, and also the carbon emission. So which basically the same thing, and very correlated, all the same. So that's all the magnitudes. I will skip this, but overall you can see it's very clear. The clean energy really matters. It helps safeguard the blue sky when you are now having a much faster growth thanks to the trade war. But the clean energy is so key to safeguard your blue sky under this fast growth. And then we also say, okay, because as you know, this is very rough, it's very preliminary, but as you know that a province or city's energy source can come from all nearby places. It's basically the grid. And then we say, okay, if your city itself, you don't have like a very clean power plant nearby, but your grid, that region, you have higher share of the clean energy in your grid, and then you also benefit from that. So we use this grid level analysis to show. So I think that's basically, till now, we worked on this. To briefly summarize, so our conclusion till now for this working paper is that the China-US trade war friction and incentivize those manufacturers to jump the tariff war from China side to the US side. And then because they need to ship all the intermediate goods always for those manufacturing, they are not gonna 100% leave China. I interviewed some manufacturers. They said they will just relocate some pieces of their supply chain, the assembly lines to the Vietnam side. They will still produce the initial intermediate goods in the China side because they already have the labor, the skilled labor there. They're not gonna abandon all that. They still have the skilled labor, they still have their factories, they still have their base there. And then they ship the intermediate goods to Vietnam, and then they do the final piece, assembling. And then they export to the US, right? So since they still have this coordination thing, no matter whether within their own firm or their suppliers, many of them still in China. So they need transportation. Since transportation is so critical, and then the clear China border effect just emerged because of this 6 hours from Guangdong to the north part, and maybe multiple days to the south part, right? And then, but also the city need to be prepared. You cannot have nothing and just sit there and wait. You need to have some infrastructure. You need to have some pre-existing FDI, at least as a business environment. So we also shall say that. And then finally, we say that the clean energy is so critical to safeguard the blue sky in this very fast-growing supply chain reallocation. So that's my paper. Thank you so much. Questions, comments? Yeah, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for a very informative and energetic.
Yeah, I'm tired. I'm gonna drink water.
Welcome to Ann Arbor, Michigan. From Beijing, Tsinghua, and Boston.
You need a mic.
Both locations mean a great deal to me, with a lot of fun memories. Is this working? I have one question. Since my retirement, I haven't been tracking the economic development in Vietnam. So I don't know, for instance, what the GDP or GNP growth of Vietnam's economy was last year or in the preceding few years. If you can shed a bit of light on that as a start, it would be fantastic for me. But my question really is, do you know how much the FDI from China in recent years have boosted the economic growth of Vietnam as a whole? In other words, I'm trying to gauge the economic impact and economic significance of these FDIs from China in recent years.
Okay, thank you.
You understand my question?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, I think I had a plot here. Can I go back to my slides? I don't know how to go back. Yes, so I had a plot to show the export data from China to US, from other Southeast Asia countries to the US. You can see the patterns. So I didn't translate that into FDI dollar value or the FDI's contribution. I think this is early. Right. So I didn't translate that to dollar value or the FDI's contribution to GDP growth, say. But it's just to give you a sense of this, so basically it's a replacement from the US, from China side to the Vietnam and other Southeast Asia countries for these export-related industries. So I think there may be some like back of envelope calculation others did for how this contribute to their GDP growth or FDI growth. But I think not just the FDI, for Vietnam side, is a destination, not just FDI from China, but also from other countries like US. They now start to build factories there, and also some European countries because they understood this trade war dynamics. So we saw this FDI fast increase. Let me see. Yes, the FDI fast increase, but I don't have exactly the numbers to show the growth. Thank you. Other questions?
I do have a comment. I'm curious. You said you came to America 9 years ago from Beijing, Tsinghua, and in jest, in part to escape the pollution of Beijing, which I recall vividly when I taught a semester of graduate course back in 2007. You know, gray sky, and you're always unable to see sun. But the reason I'm curious whether you have been back to China during the past 9 years is because I recently spent 7 months traveling through Guangdong, Guangxi, Yunnan, Sichuan, Hunan, Shandong, but not Beijing, unfortunately. And I noticed 2 very significant achievements since I parted ways with China some 14 years ago. One is much of the pollution in those 7 provinces are gone, to my surprise. Thanks to Gold Mountain, Silver Mountain. You're aware of Jingshan, Yingshan. Yeah? The second major accomplishment noticed is the results of anti-poverty campaign during my absence from China. Yeah? So I'm wondering, first of all, if Beijing is still as bad as it was, or at least compared to when you left the city. I hope not. But based on my observation of traveling through those 7 provinces in recent months, there has been a very significant improvement in China, at least in those 7 provinces that I traveled.
Okay, thank you.
If you could comment on that.
Yes, I can comment a little bit. So that's not related to this specific paper. But when you were there in 2007, it was bad. At that time, it was not that bad because that exactly before the Olympic Games time. And they in 2007, 2008, they had a lot of efforts. They put a lot of efforts to clean up the cities, the pollution. They had that very harsh policies such as driving restriction, like car driving restriction like that. And then later the pollution, at that time I remember was not that bad, but Beijing still, we had blue skies. But after 2008, then became the financial crisis at that time, 2009. And then at that time, the Beijing central government, they had this stimulus plan. They just poured a lot of money into infrastructure and into all these sectors. And that just accelerated the problem, a pollution problem after 2009. I think the worst period for Beijing or for the major cities was between 2010 and 2015, that period, when I was there most of the time. That was very polluted. And then later, thanks to their, also they have the environmental campaign to improve the environment, to address those issues, especially put these environmental indicators to local officials' performance evaluation criteria. So not just a GDP-based, but also some like other indicators like pollution or income inequality, all those things, and they gradually became better. So I do have a paper to study, like, especially for this after this Hu Jintao period, in that period, then they had all these political incentives to incentivize local governments, local officials to not just the economic growth, but also environment. And then later I came here, and then later thanks to COVID, and then you see all the COVID time, because you shut down and then it's blue sky. And now the economy is not very good, but that's also, but the side effect is the pollution is also not that bad. So I think that's all the factors. That's my experience.
So have you been back to China in the last 9 years?
Yes, many times, many times.
Yeah, there's a question there, yeah. You want to ask? Oh, let me give you this.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Zheng, for this very informative talk. I just have a question about the clean energy part in Vietnam, because I don't have much knowledge about the green energy issue in Vietnam, but I just wonder if this energy is like produced domestically, I mean within Vietnam, or is it like exported from other countries? I'm asking this question because I know that clean energy has caused some like social justice issues in some countries or regions, for example, in Taiwan and also in mainland China. For example, like solar panels like take up this land, maybe from like peasants, farmers, or other like people. So I wonder if green energy is also causing like similar issues in Vietnam, and also if clean energy should be used as a sole indicator for sustainability, or if there are other like dimensions you're also like considering when evaluating whether Vietnam's development is sustainable or not. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yes, so first of all, this is a very cool question. First of all, the clean energy, of course, not the sole factor. And for example, technology. So suppose you think about a manufacturer like Foxconn, they move their factory from China to Vietnam. They're not gonna, it's not like they just move the same factory, right? They cannot move that because it's like fixed to the ground. But they will rebuild a new factory. And then in general, if you compare a new factory in 2024 with the old factory in 2000 or even before, the new factory will be much greener, right? The capital will be much greener because these 20 years of the technology advancement, so more efficient to produce 1 unit of product. They will use less energy and also greener. And they know how to, the pollution abatement of the technologies. So that is a very important factor, this technical effect, the move of this. And also you see the FDI, they will not only bring in capital and jobs, but they also will bring in the know-how and the management and all this from the more developed regions, the technology into there. So that also helps. The general technological advancement, the FDI inflow help. And this one is another factor to help. And I think, I don't know too much about how they were produced, but I think mostly domestic. Because of there's a lot of mountains and the rivers from the west to the east to the ocean. They are like natural endowment of this hydro. And then I think the south part, they also have a lot of wind and solar. I think they do have some offshore things, but it's maybe not that much. Basically, because of the nature, they have this. And then I think they are building a lot of new transmission lines to connect those places, maybe in the mountains, with this greener energy to the major production centers as the cities.
Yeah, I think it's 1 o'clock, so I have a question, but I asked Siqi during the dinner time.
So this.
So there seem to be maybe 2 different types of tariffs. One is really interested in the content, percentage of content is made where. The Trump tariff seems to be just whether it's made in China or not. Is that correct? He is rather impure, his goals, right? One day it'll be this, one day or the next. One day it's trade deficit, one day it's dumping and so forth like that. So it's hard to evaluate whether we reached his goals. But his trade war seemed to be purely about where it was finally assembled, in which case it seems to just go across the border and put it together, right? That would be the most efficient way to avoid the tariff. And did some of them actually do that?
Yes. That's
just
why
right across the border and throw them together there, right?
That's why there were some new warehouses.
Right.
Just across the border because they
right.
just ship all the things almost like 99% done in
Right.
China, and then they cross the border and then put in the warehouses. There's a lot of warehouses there. That's true, but still, that's one piece. But still, the manufacturing, they move their production lines there.
Another geographical factor that you didn't mention would be access to deepwater ports. So, for instance, I don't imagine that Hanoi has close access to a deepwater port. But did that come up in your
Yes.
figures? Yeah.
Yes, basically, you are right. So basically, for the China and Vietnam, they ship these intermediate goods by the roads. But then when they export to the global market, that's a port. And so for the heavy ones, like computers and not computers, like TV sets and like that, mainly the ports. And then for the very chips, they use airplane, the airport.
So next, thank Professor Zheng for a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can talk more later.